Hello, good morning, possibly good afternoon or good evening to you. It is great to meet you this way. May the grace and peace of the Lord be with you and your ministry wherever you are connected from. I would like to thank President Craig Barnes and the Board of Trustees for this very meaningful award. I am truly honored and humbled to be a recipient of this award, knowing there are so many Princeton Seminary alumni who are equally qualified and deserve to receive this award. I also thank Dr. Barnes for supporting the AAPI community in a very timely manner. To look back, I thank God for the opportunities that I have been able to serve the Lord and God's people as a theological educator and administrator. As a theological educator, I'm deeply indebted to the education I received from Princeton Seminary. It was not just the scholarship in the area of church history, but also many aspects of theological education, particularly the way Princeton Seminary respects and leads her students to grow into responsible ministers for the glory of God. In this sense, my honor today is all about the honor of Princeton Seminary. On this occasion, I would like to remember and thank those who made great contributions to my life at Princeton Seminary and beyond. First, all my church history professors at the time, particularly Drs. Jane Dempsey Douglas and S.N. McKee, for their untiring love and guidance in many specific ways to shape me as who I am today. I also would like to thank my friends from the PhD program. Please allow me to call out their names. It will take little time. Andrea Struck, Amanda Berry-Woolley, Cynthia Jurison, Kimberly Chastain, Liam Van Dyke, Haruko Ward, Bonnie Patterson, Yang-Eun Chang, Craig Edward, Gary Hansen, and many, many Korean students from different programs. I miss you all and thank you all for your love and support. Now I would like to share my experiences and observations as a theological educator in Korea and Asia, which have stretched me as a minister of gospel to love and serve people in Asia. I pray my sharing today will benefit you, as we all have been called to participate in the ministry to serve God's people in collaboration. The history of theological education in Korea and Asia has a very close relationship with the mission of American churches in the 19th and 20th centuries. It is well known that Princeton Seminary alone had sent out so many missionaries as a result of the mission movement, particularly the student volunteer movement at the turn of the 19th century. Dr. James Moffat says in his book, Princeton Seminary in American Religion and Culture. Do you have a quotation there? The plan of the Princeton Seminary gave as one of the purposes of institution to found a nursery for missionaries to the heathen and to search as a destitute of the stated preaching of the gospel. He further tells us in an address at the centennial of the seminary in 1912, Robert E. Spear, himself a one-time student at the seminary, and then a corresponding secretary of Presbyterian Board of Foreign Missions, estimated that from its founding, 1812 to 1875, the seminary sent out 1 out of every 18 of its students abroad. According to Spear's 1912 calculation, the percentage of students serving in foreign missions, 1 in 18, doubled after 1875 to 1 in 9. He particularly gloried in the class of 1902, with the largest percentage of its matriculated students going out to the foreign field, 13 out of 59, 1 out of 4.5. Despite some disparities in the number crunching, the overall conclusion is the same. Princeton Seminary experienced a significant surge in the number of foreign missionaries it sent out after 1880. The effects of American missions in the 19th and 20th centuries were well demonstrated and felt in Korea, possibly more than any other countries. American missionaries were the first Protestant missionaries to Korea, and soon they outnumbered the missionaries from any other countries. Their mission works had no boundaries, but certainly focused on evangelism itself. To strengthen and strategize Christian evangelism, American missionaries introduced the school education, medicine and hospital, and various types of social service. It is well known that American Presbyterian Church was better received by Koreans than any other churches. And many believe that it had to do with three-self method introduced by an American Presbyterian missionary, John Livingston Nevius from China. John Nevius graduated Princeton Seminary in 1853, and at the same year, he left for China with his newlywed wife. After 6-month sea travel, he arrived at Ningbo and then spent most of his time in Shandong, China. During his ministry, he became known for his three-self method of church planting. That is self-propagation, self-governance, and self-support. With this method, he promoted Bible study, strict discipline for believers, cooperation with other Christian groups, and tried to be helpful wherever he found needs. In 1890, Nevius was invited to explain his method to the new Presbyterian missionaries in Korea, including Samuel Austin Moffat. Samuel A. Moffat, father of our own Samuel Hugh Moffat, arrived in Korea in 1890, 6 months before the decisive visit of John Nevius. The 7 first Presbyterian missionaries at the time in Korea were fully persuaded by Nevius and adapted the Nevius method to their fledgling mission work in Korea. The results were quite extraordinary. It certainly shaped the young Korean Presbyterian Church and the minds of its leaders then and today as well. Professor Alan Neely says, Moffat stressed the 2 facets of the plan, especially intensive Bible study for all believers and evangelism by all believers. Beginning in August 1890, Moffat made several excursions to the north, and 3 years later, he moved permanently to Pyongyang, the capital city of North Korea. Now, where the response to the gospel and the growth of the church became legendary. Later, analysis indicate a number of reasons, apart from missionary methods, that helped to account for the remarkable growth of Korean Presbyterian churches during this era. But Moffat's contribution is indisputable. Self-propagation and self-governance required immediate theological education. Without trained native ministers, the church would not be evangelistic or autonomous. So Samuel A. Moffat began the Presbyterian Theological Seminary with 2 students meeting in his home in 1901. In 1907, the first seminary graduates, they became the first 7 pastors in Korea. You have a picture there. Then the first independent presbytery was formed under the leadership of Moffat as the first moderator. Today, there are many theological seminaries in Korea, probably more than we need just by its numbers. But once 2 Koreas united, we will probably need more seminaries anyway. There are two kinds of seminaries. First, a seminary coexisting with a theological college, somewhat like divinity school in the US. Then a seminary existing without an undergraduate program like my school, Trinity Graduate University. The title Graduate University had developed only in 1996 when the Presbyterian elder Kim Young-sam became the president of the country. Korean schools directly, then and now, directly and strictly governed by the Ministry of Education in terms of accreditation, including admission quotas. Before 1996, a graduate school could not stand alone as a school. So if you wanted to start a university, seminary, you had to establish a college first. Then you can add a seminary as a graduate school. The admission quota, the number of students you can receive each year, was another concern because the number of admissions was not large enough to cover the needs of the church, which experienced enormous rapid growth in the 1970s and through 1990s. In order to fill this gap, seminaries created two types of students: students accepted with a government recognition and students with only denominational recognition. What about small-sized denominations which cannot afford university? So they remained as unrecognized seminary until 1996 and considered to be second-class or second-level educational institutions, although they were almost as qualified as the others in terms of standards and quality. Now, when you come to Korea, you find more than 50 seminaries of both kinds around Korea, more than 2/3 located in Seoul and its vicinity. What about Asia? The Asian situation is quite complex. The accreditation for theological education differs from country to country. However, it is generally true that governments do not take into consideration the different nature of education we pursue. So the governmental standards or the accreditation standards are not so fitting to apply in theological education. So the need for alternative accreditation became demanding, especially from the countries where Christianity is a minority and under persecution. Finding qualified theological educators was another challenge. Missionaries had been theological educators in these countries, but gradually they left with different reasons, and native leaders had to fill the gap. However, we experienced two problems. First, the so-called brain drain phenomenon, which means Asian leaders, Christian leaders who had studied abroad on the request of national church did not necessarily come back home. Second, Asian educators, without having gone through contextual digestion of Western theological education after they studied in the West. So training theological educators in Asia became very much a pressing issue in Asia. Out of these concerns and needs, Asia Theological Association came into being more than 50 years ago with a catchphrase of "We train Asians in Asia." It has grown to have 249 accredited schools and 130 associate member schools around Asia. And recently, and surprisingly, Asian diaspora communities around the world, including Europe and the US and Canada. They are mostly Chinese seminaries, though, or the seminaries for mission to China. Having served on ATA's executive board since 2007 and as a vice chairperson from 2018, I was able to observe theological education in Asia rather closely. Theological education in Asia may not be easy to generalize because of its diverse political and religious situations. However, it may be characterized as follows: a great focus on Bible education, compulsory attendance to chapel and school-wide activities, strong dependency on translated theological books by Western authors, usually male authors, and keen interest in church ministry training. Schools are run by denominations, but also by missionaries or independent individuals and their family members. In any case, they are operated with a minimum cost. ATA has been striving to improve the quality of theological education by developing standardized accreditation manuals and procedures, value-added service like leadership training, coaching for sustainability, publications including Asia Bible Commentary series, and monographs including textbooks, and also to promote fellowship and solidarity, which is very important for Asians. Lastly, what about the global pandemic? What effect does COVID-19 bring to global education in Asia? Overseas Council under the United World Mission now, which has been supporting theological education around the majority world, or the Global South, made a research to gauge the impact of COVID-19 in theological education last year. I would like to highlight just one of the results found in the report: the change of enrollment of Overseas Council member schools. As you see in the statistic, the diagram there, about 1/3 increased, 1/3 the same, and 1/3 decreased. So as long as the online education was provided, the seminary survived, if not better. COVID-19 made online education inevitable and indispensable. And surprisingly, its reception was not too bad, unlike most of the initial concerns from theological educators. Commuting students feel more satisfied since they do not have to struggle and suffer everyday traffic, especially in Asian and the major cities in Asia, if you ever visited these cities. Students outside the town or out of the country feel more accessible with the online education. So certainly we are into a new age, and we need to think a lot more about the issues involved in online theological education. Certainly there's positive responses to online education. The first time the positive response to online theological education I ever heard was in May 2016 at Global Forum for Theological Educators Conference held at Dortmund near Frankfurt, Germany. I remember the strangeness and surprise when Dr. Daniel Elisher, the then president of ATS, Association of Theological Schools in the US and Canada, introduced the ATS permission of full online MDiv program for member schools. Princeton Seminary is one of the member schools. It may take some time to assess the whole effect of such a program, but without any time for this assessment, we are forced to provide quality online theological education, which makes all theological educators chief office of content and at the same time chief office of technology. To conclude, the theological education in Asia lacks resources and therefore still depends on Western theological education to a great extent, in fact. And in addition, there are many complicated problems and issues to solve, such as financial dependency, structural rigidness, ownership struggle between denomination and school board, moral hazard of family owners or missionaries, and further unnecessary competitive spirit among seminaries. However, I see theological education here is dynamic and prayerful. Students are much engaged in ministries while they are learning at seminaries. And believe it or not, many groups of the students from my school alone, praying for the school every night at June prayer meeting. And further, more and more women students and second career students, they are looking for a chance to receive theological education. So we are becoming more diverse in age, gender, and experiences. So I ask for your prayers for theological educators and theological schools in Asia to be more faithful and effective during this transitional time. As Paul encourages us in Philippians 2:4, we are to look not only to our own interest, but also to the interest of others. Theological education has been a strategic and effective opportunity to build Christian leadership, to share the gospel to the world, that God so loved to share God's only Son, Jesus Christ. Thank you so much for your attention, and God bless you.